Yes. Okay, you should be able to start recording or start
sharing.
You should be able to share your screen is what I'm trying to say. I get a little like that in the afternoon.
Wait, I gotta,
Me too.
wait, I got to.
Do you need help, Paul?
Yeah, why don't you just do it and you can just bring them up when I want them to.
Oh, well, if you want, it's the bottom. It's at the bottom of your screen. It'll be the green button that says share screen.
Yeah,
So you'll just click on that and it'll
yeah, I
show.
got that, but I don't see my,
Is your PowerPoint open?
oh, it's not open.
It has to be open. Mhm.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Yeah, well, let me get back to
Yeah, Sarah can only do so much, Paul.
that.
And then from there, you can just open the PowerPoint.
I'm trying to get to my PowerPoint.
Technology is just wonderful if it works. There we go. Okay.
There we go. Let me. Okay. All right. We'll get started. Now, I'm going to talk a fair amount about the deficit myth by Stephanie Kelton. And it's called Modern Monetary Theory. And she calls it the birth of the people's economy. So initially I'm going to present some charts as to what happened the last 40 years. I knew about some of these ideas before I read the book, but it sure helped clarify me. And many progressive economists agree with her conclusions. And Jim Peach, he was going to try to make it today, but he wasn't sure. He's just coming back from Santa Fe. I talked to him last week, and he's a supporter of these ideas. And it was published in 2020, so it was just recently published. So initially, I'm going to talk about, I'm going to present some charts, some slides to kind of give an indication of what went on the last. Okay. So distortions of federal policy the last 40 years. How come we can always find money for tax cuts in the military, especially since 1980? And these tax cuts occurred under the Reagan, and I'm talking recent now, Bush Jr. and Trump administrations. And military budgets also increased under these administrations. But what was missing is money for good paying jobs, retirement, healthcare, education, infrastructure, climate change, and ensuring the effectiveness for our democracy. Those sort of things, whenever those were talked about, we always talked about the debt. So I'm going to go through some charts here just to indicate what has gone on so far as taxes and military budgets recent times. Now you can see back in 1920, of course, that was World War I, so the military budgets were fairly high. Oh no, this is the federal tax rate. That's the reason they were high. And then, of course, they dropped down considerably, leading up to the Great Depression. That was during the glory days. And then, of course, after the Great Depression, they started going up again. And they got up to all the way to marginal tax rate now, up to 90%. Now, people at the top of the food chain, they never paid that much. They had many different deductions that they had, but it got up to 90%. And so you can see, and then it dropped a little bit in the after the 60s, but it really dropped in 1980, all the way down to 28%. And so then it came back up a little during the Bush Senior and Clinton administrations, and dropped back a little bit in the Bush Junior, and then it kind of stayed at that level. Now here's a corporate tax. Back in after World War II, it was high as 50%, and it stayed just around that until, again, in the 80s, dropped down to about 30%, 32%, and then, of course, it dropped down during the Trump administration, all the way down to 20%. So you can see what's happened to the corporate tax rate. And as looking at it, this is looking at the G7 countries, more advanced countries, Japan, Canada, France, Germany, and so forth. And as a percent of their GDP, we're the lowest, only 1%. So corporate people have really been fortunate. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And now here you can see, and that's on the right, I don't know if you can see it or not, but since the tax cuts since from 2008 through 2001 through 2018, essentially all of them went, 65% went to the top people. And so, you know, that's been the nature, especially since the last 40 years. That's what has happened. But even since 2001, the bottom 80% didn't get much.
Paul, is this on income or wealth?
That's income. It's the tax. The tax cuts we had from 2001 to 2018 essentially all went to the top 20%, especially the top 1%. Now here is for the highest income taxpayers from 1945 to 2009, and it even went down after that. You can see what has happened to the top 0.1%, 0.01% and 1%. It's gone down considerably over that period of time. Now this is, this goes all the way back to 1934. So you have the blue on the bottom is income tax. Now, since about the 1950, that has stayed right around 45% of our total revenue. And you'll see back in the early 50s, the corporate tax was about 30–40% of the total income tax. But it's gone down. Now, this is only up until 2017. But anyway, it's down to about 5% now. What the yellow is payroll taxes, and for such thing as Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and really that should be kept separate. The payroll tax, because that's what people that are working pay into payroll, and then when they retire, they're expected to get Social Security and Medicare. And that should be kept separate from other, because you pay payroll tax up to about $130,000. And above that, people that get income above that don't pay anything beyond that. So everybody pays into it. Even a student that works at a very low salary pays into the payroll tax. Whenever you get paid, you're paying into that. And so that's the change, over a fair number of years. And payroll taxes now are almost as much. This only goes up to about 20, almost as much as income tax, so far as money going into the system. Now here's defense spending. You could see, of course, in World War II, it jumped up. Now this is on constant dollars. I think it's based on 2009 dollars, I believe. Yeah, right. So that you can see as you get out towards the end there, it's almost back up to where it was in World War II. So we have increased our military spending tremendously over the last number of years, especially during in the 80s. You can see it went up, and then it also went up again in 2000 period. And so military spending, we just, the last time, and both parties have been part of this. In Trump's last budget that he put forth, he put it at a certain level, and Congress even raised it of $50–60 billion. So we've been very generous for the military. Now here, discretionary spending, that's everything except the payroll taxes. And so you can see, if you just look at discretionary spending, military is almost 2/3. Everything else in the government is, whether it's veterans, Department of Agriculture, education, you name it, housing, almost discretionary spending, and that's money that has to be passed by each Congress. And so you can tell that we have really been generous for our defense spending. As compared to other countries, you can see that we're way ahead of everybody else. We're about 3 times ahead of where China is. And you can see, as compared to everyone else, we spend a fair amount on our military.
Paul, point to where China is. I can't see China.
Oh, it's on the bottom.
Oh, there I see it. Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
And then there's everybody else. And so, the blue is the US. And so, we just spend a lot of money on our defense as compared to other countries. Now here is wealth. This is a rather dramatic chart. Very simple, very straightforward. A top 1% has about 45% of the nation's wealth. Top 1%. The next 19% has the rest, and the bottom 80% has a little bit of yellow on the top, so far as wealth. And so we have distorted our wealth distribution so much, it's just crazy. And it affects everything, our politics, people's well-being. It's just atrocious. As compared to every other developed country. I spent a fair amount of time when I was with the World Bank, and even before that, in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and they don't have that same kind of a distribution, not even close. Now, this is the other really major, also, that other developed countries don't have, If a person is able to qualify for going to college, pretty well, the system takes care of it. And whereas here, the student debt, that yellow is student debt. You can see everything else, whether it's mortgage, auto, credit card, is down here in the bottom. The student debt is now today is $1.6 trillion. $1.6 trillion. Imagine that. That students own. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. But it affects people coming out of college, and even some that quit college, they still owe that debt. And how come businesses can go bankrupt but students can't? I never have understood that.
Yeah.
So now I'm coming back to the book. It's called Modern Monetary Theory. And in this book, she says that federal debt is not the problem. Inflation should be our main concern. Household, businesses, state, and local governments must all balance their books. But the federal government is different. It's the only entity that can issue currency. No other entity in our country can issue currency. And we got out of the gold standard in 1971, and ever since then, that kind of changed everything. And then, since then, the dollar has become the world currency, and still is. And so, oil, you name it, is generally based on dollar terms. Countries like Canada, Japan, UK, Australia, they also have monetary sovereignty, but certain other countries don't. Like European countries, like Greece, for example, they're part of the euro, so they don't have any control over their currency. And Venezuela, they've screwed up so bad that they don't have any credibility. And so, but the others do. Countries like Canada, Japan, UK, Australia, New Zealand. Many politicians in the US and elsewhere should be run like a household. That's not true. They're not the same. Again, I come back to all the rest of them are currency users. The only one that's a current issuer is the US federal government. I don't know if anybody gone through the, I work right across the street from it where they print dollars. Anybody been there? It's rather interesting to see those money come rolling off the presses. Anyway, according to the book, that is not the problem. Inflation is. And anytime we have unused resources, labor, natural resources, factories, we should not worry about the debt. The Federal Reserve, that's set up separately, had been for many years now, has a dual responsibility to control inflation and maintain full employment. And since the 70s, it's done this pretty well. We're underspending whenever we're not using our full capacity. And that's just a fact. Is another part of this MMT, and this is, I found very interesting, and would be provided money for a job guarantee program in the US. Money for this would be provided by the federal government, but would be implemented by the states and local communities. The level of pay would be a living wage, say $15 an hour today. It could create a 21st century civilian conservation corps. prevention of flood control, sustainable agriculture, child care, taking care of aging populations. In other words, people, all the needs that are in communities that aren't taken care of, when we have a recession, this would automatically go into effect, because we have recessions in any capitalist economy. It's normal. You're going to have recessions. So the idea here is when we have recessions, this kind of guaranteed job program would click in and would provide money to state and local communities to do things that they wouldn't have money for. And then when the private sector comes back strong, then the program would be reduced. So this is an important part of her of modern monetary theory.
Paul, I want to correct one thing. You said that $15 was a living wage. It really isn't. It's
they
a
have to
number
set
that
the
people
minimum.
are aiming for, but it's not a living wage.
No, but they have to set the level of somewhere, and it's only $7.25 nationally now. And so, if according to the book, it could be higher than this, but she used the for the day. I agree with you, Jan. I know what you're saying, but it's better than we have today.
That's right. But we've been saying $15 for at least 7 years.
Yeah, you're right. Examples of when we did this. In the 30s, the Great Depression, we spent money just like I talked before, because there was no money out in the system. We didn't worry about where the money came from. When we went into World War II, we did this. We did increase taxes, but we did it, and knowing that we had to do it, we did it. Went to the moon without thinking about it. Spent money on defense and tax cuts without thinking about it. Now, what she's saying is time we did it for the people's economy. That's what she's saying. So, deficits that really matter are things like good jobs with benefits. America's manufacturing employment, any of us that are old enough remember back in the 50s and 60s when there was unions and we made our own stuff. There was good jobs out there. But when NAFTA, World Trade Organization came along and friendly trade deals for corporation, and of course the 2009, 2010 financial crisis didn't help either. Now, saving deficit, typical working families put a little money away for retirement. Private firms used to have, when I first I first worked in the private sector going back into the early 60s, and they had guaranteed retirement plans. And when I went in the federal government, I had a guaranteed retirement plan. But now, even at the federal government level, it's based on they put money into a 401k, and it's based on whether the stock market does well or not. And even states and other government entities now aren't much better. Now, back in the healthcare, back in the 70s, we had the highest life expectancy of any developed country in the world. But today, we lag behind most other developed countries. Also, there's a tremendous difference in our society between people at the high end of the socioeconomic scale as compared to others. And so healthcare is still a huge issue in our country today. Other deficits that really matter, education. Good education for K through 12 is now basically based on I don't know what that is. It's really based on a zip code. If you're in a poor district, they just don't have the money. that they used to have. Can't afford filing college costs. As I indicated that before, it's a drag on our economy because when students get out of college, and some that don't even finish college, they still have the debt they have to pay. And it's a huge problem because they can't start a family and it's a drag on our economy. And infrastructure, both physical and human, as well as housing for people that are homeless, is not taken care of. Climate, are the goal can sustain it without a planet that's well taken care of, without clean water, fertile soil, weather, healthy ecosystems. If global warming over this century to 1.5 degrees Celsius, about 3 degrees, a little less Fahrenheit, we're not doing very well. Every indication is that if we don't do something different over the next 20, 30 years or so, it's going to be up to 3 degrees. And we think we've got problems today with weather systems that are out of sort. We're going to be in big doo-doo. Last night, Marion and I watched a program, and it was David Attenborough. He's from England. And he has talked many times. I've seen him on TV before. But he says we simply have to figure out a way to take care of this climate, this planet, or we're going to lose it. And I agree with him. And then health of our democracy, I don't need to say much about that. That's a tremendous problem. So those are kind of, according to what the book said, those are the deficits that really matter. And as soon as those kind of issues have come up over the last 40 years, politicians, both Republicans and Democrats, come up with the idea that, well, we can't afford any more money for that. We can afford it for tax cuts and military, but we can't afford it for these kind of things. So what is the people's economy? Private and public investment is all combined, so there's living standards for everyone. Every rural and urban community has sufficient health, education, transportation, and meet their needs. We can really improve the well-being, not just gross domestic product. Human activity rejuvenates and enriches all in the ecosystem. Nation trade in ways that enhance living standards and environmental standards for all of us, not just for the privileged few. Economy, we're, price, let's see, did I shift back? Yeah, no, that's fine, yeah. Comprise strong middle class and good wages and benefits. All are ensured a carefree environment when we're retired. Needed research is also done, taken care of for everything that's needed to have a technology advanced economy. We have an abundance of resource and labor to accomplish these goals. We have the resources to do this. That's the main point I'm trying to make. So this, I thought, So just to, I know some will ask about this. There's been an uptick in inflation over the last short time. Used cars, food, gasoline, housing. Gasoline, we didn't, during the, before the pandemic, the price of oil had gotten so low that all of a sudden people that were producing oil, whether it's Saudi Arabia or Russia or even here, they dropped off their production considerably. And so then recently, people have started driving a whole lot more. And so all of a sudden, demand has gone up. And so prices gone up about a third. And so anyway, we have not caught up with the, so far as oil production. And both Saudi Arabia and Russia have purposely kept back their production to keep the price high. And when it comes to like lumber has shot up, 2, 3, 4 times. And but there in the month of June, the price of lumber has dropped 40%. So there's every indication that it'll get back down to a reasonable amount. And so the people, you know, during the first 15 months of the pandemic, people didn't do much, but now they want to have a normal life, and it is increased demand. So the Federal Reserve and anybody that's not trying to attack Biden will realize that we should get back to more normalized over the next 6 months. Also, the labor force, the people that are in the actual labor force is dropped considerably. Many of them dropped out, especially women with children. They had to take care of their children. And so they will come back when there are better conditions and wages occur. And so that also is a situation. So participation rate has dropped from in 2067 down to 61 today. So we have a considerable amount of unused capacity in our economy, so that we should be able to handle this without any problem. And one thing about inflation, it's generally based when you have your labor force is at the level where people need to, there's just not enough labor to do the job, but we have plenty of labor today. So anyway, that's kind of the main part of my presentation. So with that, I'll get rid of these slides here, and we'll have a discussion. Can I get, let's see. Hopefully I can get them out. So Sarah, are you there? Can I get them out of here?
I think you have to say, stop sharing. There you go.
Yeah, there. Okay, well, anyway, questions, comments?
Well, around this,
Jane?
I think Dave had started out first. Go ahead, Dave.
Okay, well, I was going to say, my understanding is, again, you have that big thing, payroll taxes, Social Security. I thought that was actually, if you look at the details, that's actually an insurance program, at least
Yes,
as it was originally.
It's not like federal. Yeah, it's a security program.
And so, and it's been viewed, I believe, as a bit of a low-cost mortgage or a lender to the federal government, where they can borrow money from their piggy bank and then they scream about it being a debt.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah.
Okay, but it's still, so the idea of treating it as it's called a payroll tax, but it's really a payment for employment insurance, I guess I would call it.
Yes, it
No
really,
age.
I don't know when we put these two together, but it was done just to show that we're spending all this money supposedly, but this really isn't a typical federal income tax program.
That was done during the Johnson administration.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, you know, if we accept what Kelton says in her book, which of course it goes right along with what I believe, so it's easy for me to accept. But if we accept what she says, we have plenty of money to have a society like the Scandinavian countries, where people are rated over and over, decade after decade, as being, well, the last 2 decades of being the happiest people on earth, where there's very equitable distribution everybody who does a job makes a decent living wage. There's outstanding free education and healthcare. The well-being, the indicators of well-being are the highest for, about over anybody around the world. So we could do this too if we spent our money differently, it sounds like to me. So
yeah.
the big question to me is, how do we convince the people that we send to Congress to spend money differently?
Well, it's very difficult because even Democratic and Republican administrations, they always talk about, well, we can't go into debt. We can't go into debt. It's like a household. But like she says, and I believe it too, that the federal government is not like a household. It is not. It issues currency. And as long as we don't create inflation, it's fine. That means that we have resources out there to do what we want. And I'll give an example. Japan has run much more deficits than we have for the last 30 years. And everybody says they're going to go into hell and go this way and go that way. It hasn't happened because they issue their own currency. And since if you have your own currency and you run a good economy, you're fine. And so they've kept their interest rates low. They have twice the deficit we have and have had for 30 years. Mm-hmm. And so it's a kind of a mindset on the part of politicians that there's, they don't make the distinction when you're a currency issuer. That's different. And so ever since we got out of the gold standard back in the early 70s, it's a different world.
Mm-hmm. I remember many years ago, I went to a program, it was put on by New Progressive, or Progress Now, New Mexico. That was it, Progress Now, New Mexico. And Tim Keller gave a workshop on the fact that we are not short of funds in the state of New Mexico, and we are limited. We cannot just go and produce more currency, but we are not hurting for money in New Mexico. It's just a question of priorities.
Exactly.
And our priorities are not for people.
Right.
No.
And it seems that the same at the federal level. If what we do is spend almost 2/3 of our income on defense, we can't do these other things.
Almost 2/3.
Mm-hmm. How do we change the mindset of the people we elect to decide to spend for these other things that could produce a really great, healthy, just society, as opposed to military defense? How do we do that?
Military defense relies very heavily on private corporations.
Right.
And they're the ones that are lobbying to maintain military spending.
They're the only ones.
It's corporate greed.
I spent 25 years in Washington, and I went up on the Hill many times. And the military services, whether it's Navy, Army, or whatever, they all have their offices up there in both the House and Senate. And they're the only ones allowed to do that. They have their offices right there, right next to the Congress, right there. And nobody else can do it. I asked somebody one time, how come they can do this up here? And so they said, well, they got special privileges. And but I wanted to follow up on Jane. I spent kind of time in places like Denmark and Sweden and so forth. And man, it's different. They have 3-4 months of vacation every year. They work hard when they're working, but they do fine. They have higher taxes than we do, but not when they, we also, a lot of our taxes go, as you know, to defense and tax cuts. And but they're very happy with their situation.
Mhm. And as
Yeah,
my,
Jack.
Well, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oops. Oh, you're
muted now,
muted,
Jack.
Jack. You
What's
we
that?
lost you. Here we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Now,
We in New Mexico are the recipients of all of this defense spending.
Oh, yes, we are.
What would we do without White Sands Missile Range, Holloman Air Force Base, Clovis Air Force Base, Kirkland Air Force Base? Whenever there's any talk of cutting defense
Yeah.
spending, our congressional delegation goes into action.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'll tell you, they're very smart at making sure in each congressional district that they have some kind of a facility or something that people know that people are working there. And so when I was in the federal government, they made them aware of that to every congressman, whether it's a senator or representative, that, hey, we got to protect that facility in our district. And yes, you're right.
In the,
But
in the,
then on the other hand, if we do have all that military and we get all this money, why in every statistic is New Mexico on the last place when it comes
Right.
to education and to healthcare and infrastructure, when it comes to
Mhm.
Native American
best place to
places,
raise a
you know,
child.
when we had this
Right.
pandemic, they were dying like flies.
49.
What the fuck is going on here?
Well, it's
Really?
somehow, you just don't have enough access to people in Congress and you don't pay enough money to get them there.
No, but where is this money going when we have so much military here? Where is the money? If it trickles down, where is that down?
Well, our current military now, our defense, like for example, in Afghanistan, and I was there for about 2 or 3 years, more than half of it is our consultants. I mean, you won't believe.
Yeah.
I flew over there many times, and on planes. They weren't military people; they were consultants. These guys, they got paid big money. I'm talking big money.
And you don't live in New Mexico.
I got paid a little bit compared to them.
So it sounds like we've
Jane, Dave has had his hand up for a very long time.
go
Let's
ahead.
let him go.
Go ahead.
okay, the question I had around the military, how much of that is hardware and how much is personnel? Is the consultant piece really an outsourced piece? And because, you envision all these people who are employed ranging from the private to the general or whatever. But is it really going into hardware, most of it, which is
A
hiring
lot
people
of
to
it,
do?
the consultants over the last 40 years have just increased tremendously. When I lived in Washington, half of my neighbors were consultants. I don't know the split. It used to be, well, for example, when I went in the Navy, we did all our own cooking and everything, all that kind of, none of that's done by, it's all done by private people now. All of it.
So
Everything is contracted out.
So they hire a cook, probably the cook at the military base is paid less than he would be paid, or she, if she were actually in uniform.
Yeah.
And so they get away from that, and then the guy or gal who runs the company that's contracting
Right.
rakes off the difference. Well, it sounds like an opportunity.
All of that stuff that used to be done by the military, and none of it's done by it anymore. It's all contracted out. Yeah.
Yep.
Fact.
I'll ask a question.
Yep.
Paul, in the book, did she talk at all about cyber terrorism and ransomware the impact or projected impact that all of that craziness is going to have
With
on
ransomware, no,
our
she
economy.
didn't talk about that. The book came out in 2020, and I'm sure she had done it before that. She didn't talk about ransomware at all. Yeah, but that's small amount of, it's gotten serious, don't get me wrong, but it's relatively small compared to what we spend on some of these. There's some aircraft that we've spent billions and billions on, they still don't fly. No, it's Jane asked, how do we change this? Well, I'm telling you, ever since the 60s and 70s when I came into the workforce, and many of us did, it's changed tremendously. I was there when Reagan came into office, and when I went to Washington in '78, there were no homeless people, none. And you could walk into any federal building without a guard at the door. 1 year after he came into office, he cut off all federal funding to, generally it wasn't the federal that did it. Money went out to like churches and NGOs and different organizations to make sure there were not homeless people. He cut that off within 1 year after he went in office. And within 1 year, we had homeless people on the street in Washington, D.C. And then many of these, and maybe that wasn't right either, but many of these people didn't have the mental capacity to take care of themselves, quite frankly. And so that's what, more than half these homeless people are mentally incapable of taking care of themselves. When I went to Sweden on a talk a couple times, same thing was there. Everything was clean, no homeless people. They were taken care of. Yeah, same thing in Denmark, by the way. So, any other questions, comments? So the only way we can change the idea that, like the lady said in the book, we have true deficits in our economy, and it's not the Defense Department, and it's not tax cuts. It's taking care of people. And we have changed in our attitude towards, good wages, good benefits. That has, we had a lady that comes in for Marion now to take care of, to do therapy. And she said, boy, you grew up at the right time. When you started out, there were jobs and good retirement. And she said, that's not the case today. And it isn't. So it's a real dilemma. The last 40 years, big money people have just taken over. And it's obvious by, as I showed those charts, we saw where the money has gone. And it's really the last 40 years. Union jobs used to be good paying jobs. A person could work, take care of his family. Now we have two working people. Sometimes many of them are playing two jobs. We got to change this. It's really bad.
Joan has her hand up.
Yeah, along with Jane's question is, how do we change the people who in Congress, but how do we change the voters that are putting these people?
Yeah, I think that's the question.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so many people, they're not voting in their own best interests.
No, they're not. They're not. Especially these people that were in, they used to be able to get union wages for assembling cars and steel factories and you name it. That's all gone. And of course, service jobs are those jobs just don't pay very much, and they have no unions, and so and we are now a service economy. Really, we don't produce much here. We just don't. And we're a service economy, and we don't pay them. Just that simple.
I think that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that Jones, go ahead, Dave.
Well, okay, well, Joan, I don't know, you answered Joan. The question I have, this is Dave Rice again, sorry, is the issue of wealth distribution and political power. I think this goes back to the Citizens United decision where
exactly
money was equated to speech, and therefore it was viewed as unregulatable. I think that the wealthy have a disproportionate voice, counting if you count the number of them versus their impact, and that's part of this. The people running for office know it takes big money, and they go where the money is, and there's not that many people, so they're not going to raise their taxes, and that's going to. I think those chickens are going to come home to roost eventually.
Yeah, the Koch brothers and others like them really control our economy, control our politics. You know, they really do. It's you know, now I really think that this whole aspect of climate change and something is something we got to do about, or if we don't do anything about it over the next 30, 40 years, humans aren't going to be able to live here. I mean, I think it's that serious. And a number of other people do too. Yeah, Jane.
I think that Joan's point is so well taken about, you know, somehow we have got to change the voters, their awareness. And that goes right back to what Annetta, the good point that she made is, you know, Jack was saying, well, these military contracts are so important to our state. And yet Annetta points out, what difference has it made? We are still the poorest state. We have the worst indicators of any state in the country on almost everything. So having these contracts has not apparently helped us much in any way.
No.
And I think if you look at who really gets paid for these contracts and where they come from, they're not, you know, the majority of it is not New Mexicans who are benefiting. So, you know, if until voters realize some of these things and that they're doing what's not in their best interest, they probably aren't even going to take an interest in voting, quite honestly. And if they do, their choices are often very poor because they don't understand these things. So it has something to do with really creating broad awareness about that there is a better way to do things. And the people are going to have to feel that there's a need to change the ability, for instance, overturn Citizens United, and to change the ability of lobbyists to determine elections with their money. It's a lot of work, but it could happen. But it really does have to, we'd have to broaden the understanding of voters about what it is that is not in their best interest in
Well,
choices they're making.
When I was teaching at the university, and whenever there was a voting time period, and I would say, hey, you guys, you students, so many of them were old enough to vote. How many, you know, and then I'd say, I encourage them, I would even have a session on it. Then after it got done, how many, I'd have 20, 30 in the class, how many voted? 4 would put up their hands.
Yeah.
I mean, really, you know, yeah, we should vote. Yeah, Jan?
Well, looking at state expenditures, state budgets, really the only thing that is discretionary to speak of is education and corrections. And we put way too much into corrections.
I know.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, it's a matter of priorities. And as far as I could see, all through the United States of America, The priorities are totally screwed up, at least according to me.
Yeah, well, in countries like Australia and New Zealand, and even in Denmark and Sweden, almost everybody votes. And
Yeah,
I've been there. I have observed this on the ground, and people are very interested in public policy.
mhm.
And we don't seem to have that interest. I don't know why.
Well, one of the things that's happened in our country is we've almost eliminated civic education in the
Yeah.
high schools.
Yeah.
And there are those people, you know, in country, and this is the Scandinavian countries again, who believe that that starts in kindergarten and you teach it through every year up through your senior year about what it means to be an engaged, responsible citizen and why that matters, why that makes a difference. And that kind of stuff has disappeared from the curriculum here.
Yeah, no, it has. I know when I went to school, I went to a one-room schoolhouse the first 3 years. And even then we had recognition. And I remember I remember World War II, and my uncles and parents, and they would all get together and they all talked about civic responsibility. But that doesn't seem to be the case today. Yeah, no, it doesn't. I don't. So anyway.
Quite
We
the
have enough
opposite,
work
in
to
fact.
do.
The attitude seems to be, just leave it to us. We'll handle it. You don't need to worry about those things. Isn't that what the politicians are telling us? I've got your best interest in mind. I'm taking care of things. Don't worry about it.
I was at
And
a
vote for me. If you vote, vote for me.
I was Rosemary Sanchez. You were there, Jane, and I was talking to Bill Souls,
Mhm.
and he had hoped to get this thing done so far as these payroll disaster, taxes, and things like that.
Mhm.
And he just shook his head. I mean, the extent to which these financial organizations control politicians is just unreal.
Right. And he was talking about getting the payday lending rates
I meant
down.
payday lending.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
said it wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you know, he said, and I know this already, but he said you would be embarrassed by the behavior of our very own representatives. So I made a commitment that day that I'm going to be talking to every one of them, and I know who some of them are that really got railroaded by pressure from
Yeah, they did.
the
Now,
banking
I'm just
industry,
using
the
that as an
corporate interests.
example. We
Yeah.
all know that poor people shouldn't be paying 300-400% and they're desperate for a loan.
Right.
But that's a fact.
Mhm.
You know, that's just not right.
And it will cause the payday lenders to go out of business, but there are all kinds of great options and ways to help
Yes,
low income people get the loans and the money that they need. And they have, I just read an excellent article. It may have even come from Jan, I'm not sure. But you know, there's all kinds of things that people do when this kind of payday lending is not available, that really keeps their life from turning into a living hell, that are positive outcomes for them. And a state bank would be one of the best things.
oh, the public state bank, people have been on my tail to help them with that, and I have.
Yes, I know you have, Paul. And that could make a real difference in local businesses being effective and providing lots of jobs. And that's what we depend on in our state, small local businesses.
Yeah, Jan, you had something?
Yeah. How many of you are curious to have Johanna Bencomo's idea of giving $500 to select families every month for a while? You know, we have money that has been made available because of the pandemic, and you know, it's
Yeah,
be
but
used.
that's only short term.
Well, yes, to begin with.
To begin
Yes,
with.
because it's this
Like
special
childcare
money.
to begin with.
It's a special money. But, you know, I think what they're going to find is that people stay employed longer. because right now, if your car breaks down, you can't afford to get it fixed and you lose your job.
Yeah.
And so you're not paying taxes. I
Right.
think the state is
And you
actually,
keep falling and you keep falling and you keep falling.
right,
And eventually you're out on the street.
right. Where they have done these experiments, it's
Yeah.
worked beautifully. It does not make people want to stay home and not work. And,
No.
you know, it
Right.
makes it possible for them to work
Yeah.
and to provide for their families, for their children, and get their children further ahead, to give them some extracurricular activities. It's just, you know, it's just ridiculous to listen to Mayor Ken, who I voted for. I'm so ashamed. Well, I mean, really, he had been pretty good, I thought, but boy, since this last election, I've been very disappointed. But anyway, you know, he's saying, "Oh no, you can't do that. Those people, those lazy people, will just take advantage of that." It's a stereotype.
Well, that's the attitude we have in this country.
No kidding. Huh?
It really is. And they don't have that same attitude in some of the Northern European countries, and they do just fine.
Right. Well, I want us to
Right.
get out and support Johanna so that we get this thing through. We
Yes,
talk to the
absolutely.
other representatives or councilmen.
Mhm.
I see Sarah there. I see you, Sarah. And so next week, we're going to have Professor Jay Lillywhite. He's co-director of the a program at the university. They're trying to figure out a way to help various the farm sector, food, energy, and water challenges in New Mexico for New Mexico farmers. So it should be an interesting discussion. He's an economist at NMSU.
Okay.
So with that,
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks,
Thank
Paul.
you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
Hey,
Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
bye-bye,
Thank
everybody.
you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.